Now the third stage emerged in the third book, which is called Reimagining Japanese Education. And the cover, which you can't see, but basically there's a back cover, black and white, of kids on Juku. And my argument was that this is our image of Japanese education then, but this is actually what Japanese education looks like now. So this was Yutori Kyoiku and these types of things, right? But our image is stuck, as outsiders, is stuck in this view. So why don't we reimagine Japanese education? But of course, so the explicit question, can we reimagine Japanese education, and how can Japanese education help us to reimagine comparative education research? The deeper questions, what other perspectives are there on globalization and education? And then why are Western views of Japanese education so outdated? Why are they so dominant around the world? So I can't actually answer the questions because I myself had no idea. I was coming to this, I knew there was a need for this, but I don't know how to do it. So the best idea I had was to just create an experiment, which is open a space for dialogue to answer these questions, combining Japanese scholars and non-Japanese scholars around a common theme. So if you look on the next page, page 12 in the packet, you can see from the table of contents that what I tried to do was I tried to make sure that we had an equal representation of Japanese scholars and foreign scholars. So, for example, chapter 2, I wrote together with Kariya sensei. Then we have in chapter 3 a scholar from Denmark writing about globalization and moral education. Then in chapter 4 we have Tsuneyoshi sensei at Todai. Chapter 5, Aspinall sensei, which writes about English language education, and he's at Doshisha now. Christopher Bjork, which wrote about Yutori Kyoiku at the Chugakko level. And Aaron Miller, who was a Hakobi member, and he wrote about sports and the educational value of sports in Japan. Then we have 3 Japanese scholars. Mayumi Ishikawa, who does internationalization at Handai. Manabu Sato, of course you will all know Manabu Sato. And Keita Takayama, who's Japanese but works in Australia. Kariya sensei wrote the afterword. And then I got a very famous scholar of comparative education in the UK, Robert Cowan, to write the foreword. So all through the book, there's a balance of trying to create this dialogue between both sides so that we're trying to learn from each other rather than just sonomama putting it on there. I'm afraid that maybe as Japanese scholars, you already recognize that, but I'm kind of ashamed or embarrassed to say that I didn't recognize that danger until I had already finished my PhD. So that's how little people can see what's happening in terms of theoretical or epistemic kind of dominance of the Western tradition. Okay, so that leads me to the fourth one, and this one is probably the most challenging, absolutely the most challenging. This paper is called Living on Borrowed Time, Rethinking Temporality, Self, Nihilism, and Schooling. Now, the explicit question would be, what new perspectives can be gained if we understand empiric realities through Japanese social theory, in this case, the category of time? Now, in my field, there have been a lot of attempts to understand space, rethink the notion of space because of globalization. So space over the last 2 decades has received a lot of work. Okay? And the other as well, which means how do we deal with other cultures, other ideas, those types of things. But the other side of that, what I would call time and self, have not really been discussed very much at all. I think that that's so deep, the ways that we think about time and self are so deep in the Western academy that we can't really break out of them. So the way that I conceptualize this is that space, other, self, and time, all of these deeper questions, certain answers lead to this dominant grammar, this dominant way of thinking about the social world. So a lot of these come from philosophy, and then they're passed on to sociology, and from sociology they're passed on to comparative education. Obvious example is Hegel, passed on to Marx, and then from Marx we have people like Robert Arnove or Carlos Torres in comparative education. So what I wanted to do though, because you can see I was already here in Kyoto, and I was already starting to understand that there were different ideas down here that maybe even don't exist in Tokyo or Todai, or I wasn't ready for them at Todai, I don't know. But I wanted to try an experiment which was to use Japanese philosophers and Japanese social theory to try to reinterpret social reality. And the way that I did that was, and again, I said this is challenging and I would welcome critique, especially from, for example, Nishihira sensei, who is much more of an expert than I am on these issues. But if you turn the page, so it would be page 15 on your packet, page 15 of your packet, the way I tried to do this was to think about, go deeply into the philosophical basis of social theory. So I said there's views of time, temporality in Western thought. We can look at Nietzsche's critiques and Heidegger's critiques at that time. And of course, it's from Nietzsche and from Hegel that you get almost all the social theory that exists, whether it's Foucault or Marx or anything. Now flip the page. Again, it will be page 17 on your packet. So then I decided, okay, but having spent time here in Kyoto, I said, there actually is a possibility to recreate the very foundations. So let's use Nishitani, Keiji. In Shukyo to wa Nanika, he talks a lot about time. And I hypothesize, this is my kasetsu, but I guess this will be open for major critique. But I think that Maki Yusuke at Tokyo University was probably using a lot of the ideas from Nishitani. So Nishihira sensei is like, I'm probably completely wrong. But my point was to show that there's a continuity of an alternative way of looking at time and thinking through time that exists in Japan. And if you look on page 19, the bottom, this is a Maki Yusuke's 時間の比較社会学ということですね。From this book, he develops a perspective on time. So I challenged my field, what is it possible to think about social reality and education through an alternative philosophical and sociological lens? Now, I'm not going to go into it much, but on the next page, page 21, I use this alternative lens to reinterpret or rethink about Japanese education. So, although it seems quite strange to us, actually Japan imported this concept of time, right? Clock time and linear time was imported into Japan, and the way that it was pushed out into Japanese society was mostly through schools and factories. Now, ちょっとどういうことかっていうと、look at page 24. Page 24. And this is, I'm trying to also make this work not just theoretical, but very much empirical. So if you look at this table 1, this is the diffusion ratio of clocks in Japan. So it went very quickly from 1877 to 1907. So this means that things like schools were very central. For example, Tokeidai is the center of the school. Brands like Seiko, Casio, Citizen, these are all from that turn when Japan adopted different concepts of time. So I think Nishitani's challenge and I think Maki's challenge was not to put class differences at the center, for example, class differences at the center, or the Judeo-Christian tradition at the center of social theory, but to think about it in terms of time. So, now, I know that that's a very challenging paper, and perhaps I'm completely wrong, but I wanted to show you the fourth stage and very much the stage that I'm in right now.